PowerPoint worked out, so thanks for your patience. Feel free to grab food throughout. There are also evaluation forms and speaker bios. I hope you grabbed those as you came in, but I see that there's still a fair number of evaluations back there, so I may just make sure that each table has some as we move through the evening, and if you could fill those out for us at the end, that would be great. Welcome to our Community Land Trust Workshop. This workshop is being hosted by the Chicago Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights, specifically our Community Law Project. We have an equitable development initiative, and we're very excited to have this first workshop on community land trusts, which are a great tool for equitable development in Chicago and across the country and really around the world. We want to thank Pastor Danielle and the Lincoln Memorial UCC Church for hosting us tonight in this nice space. And thanks so much to our two speakers. Because I did pass out their bios, I won't go into great detail, but I do want to thank them for being with us. And we are very fortunate to have Naomi Davis and Bob Tucker, both Community Land Trust experts, joining
Naomi.
us tonight. Yes, and so Naomi is the founder and the CEO of Blackstone Green, which is a national sustainability network and community wealth building initiative based here in West Woodlawn and born to advance green village building. She's involved in numerous community service efforts, has been a longtime resident of the area, and is working on establishing a new community land trust. And Bob Tucker.
By the way,
yes.
No one would call 10 years a long time in this neighborhood.
Oh, well. She's been here for 10 years then. Thank you for that correction. Bob Tucker is the COO. Hope I got that right. Yes. Right. Chief Operating Officer and Executive Vice President of Programs at the Chicago Community Loan Fund. He is working on a community land trust in partnership with some other organizations as well, and he is also our advisory board member for the Chicago for the Chicago Lawyers Committee's Community Law Project. And before we get started, I'll tell you just briefly, the Chicago Lawyers Committee is a group of lawyers and other advocates working to promote racial equity and economic justice. And our Community Law Project provides free legal services to nonprofit organizations, small business entrepreneurs, and first-time homebuyers. We provide transactional legal services, and we're happy to talk with you after if you are an entrepreneur or a nonprofit organization that needs any of those legal services. And without further ado, Bob is going to lead us off, and we, both panelists, agree that we can take questions throughout, so hopefully we'll have some time at the end as well for questions, but feel free to raise your hands throughout. Thank you.
That'd be great.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, and we thought since the group is not too big, if we could go around the room quickly and just say your name, if you're with an organization, you could say that, and then what neighborhood you live in, please. Would you like to start us off?
I'm Lois White Real Estate. I'm located at 116 West 95th Street.
I'm Yvonne Green, YDG Associates, and I live in South Shore.
I'm Pat Wilcoxon. I'm a board member of the not-for-profit 501c3 that owns a building on 6200 block of Kimbark.
Thank you. Oh. Sorry, Jody.
That's okay.
Didn't jump over you.
I'm Jody Adler, and I'm the director of the Community Law Project of the Chicago Lawyers Committee.
Good evening. I'm Nubia Patah, founder of Nubia House Cultural Education and owner of Sewing with Nubia. I grew up in the Woodlawn area.
All right then.
I'm currently in the Calumet Heights area, and I was more than happy to register for this event.
Great.
Come on back.
Hey there, my name's Robert. I'm with Shakespeare Management, and I stay in Logan Square.
My name is Chris Brown. I'm with the NOCCC.
My name is Alma Weiser, and I'm with Heaven Gallery in Wicker Park.
My name is Laura Weathered, and I developed affordable housing for artists in Bucktown 15 years ago. live there now. It took me 25 years to make it happen. The Chicago Community Loan Fund was very instrumental in making that happen. And we wanted to use the land trust model, 30 years ago. And no lawyers would talk to us about it. So I'm so happy to see that there's deeper understanding of the advantages and benefits of the land trust.
Great.
Hi, my name is Maddie Sabo. I'm a longtime resident of Woodline, very concerned resident of Woodline, and whenever there are meetings being held, I try to get here so I can know a little bit more about what's going on.
Thank you. Should we go to the side here and then?
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Nadia Sol Irelia Carrasco. I found out about this meeting through a friend, but coming through a workers' cooperative that two of us are forming here around land and interested in making it a land trust in the future. Like soon, we're working on our bylaws, but like in the future, in the near future. I have lived in a little village for 23 years, and just the idea of having something like a land trust is something that I've been thinking about for a while, but not really feeling like I have the confidence to. Anyway, I feel like I'm not entirely sure what we're supposed to be saying, so I'll stop there.
Great, thank you.
Hello everyone, my name is Jasmine Martinez. Similar, I'm part of the same cooperative, Catatumbo Cooperative Farm. We hope to get up and running by 2019, and right now we're working on our, like Irene said, on our bylaws and on our model, and just getting everything kind of set up. And I also live in Little Village.
Great.
Juan Calixto with Chicago Community Loan Fund.
Thank you.
Tamika Christian with Liz Chicago.
Hi, Claudia Marchan, also with Liz Chicago.
All right. Hi, I'm Susan Grant. I'm a licensed architect of 30 years. I grew up in South Shore. I live in Hyde Park. I'm with the Tax Credit Syndicator. Our parent company is Liz. We funded $1 billion in development and tax credit in new markets, affordable housing, and community development. So we're a source for CDC funding. I'm not here in official capacity, but I thought I'd listen.
I'm Sylvester Dorsey. I was drugged here by my architect friend. I'm concerned and nosy homeowner in Grand Cross.
I'm nosy too.
Get the 411.
Every King, I live in Washington Park. I'm associated with the Washington Park Residents Advisory.
I'm Cliff Helm. I'm an attorney with John Marshall Law School's Beulah Clinic.
My alma mater.
Yep. And I'm Jeff Swenson. I'm also with Chicago List. We're here tonight to learn more about land trusts. We do a lot of work to support equitable and sustainable development in neighborhoods, and want to be a part of this network.
I'm Jim Wheaton. I'm with the Chicago Community Land Trust. We have units around the city. We've been around for about 11 years, and I live up in Albany Park.
I'm Mitra Dokes. I'm a resident of Calumet Heights. I'm a member of Emerald City Services that works with the homeless population. And I'm looking forward to learning about the land trust tonight.
Would you like to go on this slide?
I'm not sure what we're doing.
Oh, I'm sorry. We're just sharing our name and if you're with an organization or what neighborhood you live in.
My name is Lucretia Taylor, and I have a organization called the Better Sister Love Network. So I'm trying to find out more information about community.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Shatina Edwards. I'm the CEO of Mean Girls Empowerment, which is a non-profit organization providing assistance to youth, and I'm just here to learn more information as well.
Thank you.
My name is John Arnold. I work for the Interfaith Community for Detained Immigrants. We do different ministries with primarily asylum seekers and undocumented people. I am particularly working on a program that is long-term housing for asylum seekers and grantees.
My name is Malcolm Williams. I'm a homeowner in Woodlawn, and I am the Southeast Quadrant leader with the One Woodlawn organization.
I'm Liz Gardner. I'm a Woodlawn resident.
Hi, my name is Lynette McCrae. I work for the Metropolitan Planning Council. We're a planning organization, and we do advocacy and other things, and I live in Bronzeville.
Hi, I'm Deborah Adams. I'm a Woodlawn resident, and I'm also the Northeast Quadrant leader of One Woodlawn.
Hello, everybody. My name is Cullis Flynn. I'm the co-founder of Hartfield Chicago. This area brings back so many memories when I was a child or with my family. We lived up here for many of years. A lot of our clients are from West Woodlawn, and I want to know about the change. And I want to thank Naomi for inviting us to this this event.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Anthony Davis. I'm an Inglewood resident, and I'm also a landowner. And I'm here for information.
Thank you. And
hi, my name is Dixon Romeo. I'm here with CECD with the Fischer project.
thank you. I think there's a couple of new folks in the front too.
A couple of late arrivals, Paula.
Yeah.
Who needs no introduction?
Clearly.
Hi, I'm Paula Grant, and I'm with Neighborhood Housing, and I'm just here. I've had information. I used to work with Shore Bank, and I was involved with some land trusts when working for them, so I just wanted to, see what's going on with them now. And I run the Renew Woodlawn homeownership program here in Woodlawn for Neighborhood Housing, and I live in Calumet Heights.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, and sorry we're late. My name is Gwendolyn Newton. I am a member of the Advisory Council for the Renew Woodlawn area. I'm a real estate broker with Century 21, and I'm also a member of the Dearborn Realtors Board Association. As second vice president.
Great. Is there anyone that we missed?
Anything else?
Okay, great. And I realized as we were going around that I didn't say mine, I don't think. So I'm Allegra Cira Fischer, and I'm a staff attorney with the Chicago Lawyers Committee and have been working on equitable development issues for a couple of years now through CLC. And it's great to hear so many folks are from the area, of Woodlawn or surrounding areas, and we will get started.
Great. Thank you, Allegra. Thank you, Jody, for inviting me and Naomi to this. I'll put in a quick pitch again for the Community Law Project because it sounded like a lot of you. Can everybody hear me, by the way? In the back rows, can you hear me? Good? Great. All right, thanks. They do great work, and since it sounds like a lot of you are working with nonprofits or founded nonprofits, you should always think about the Community Law Project as well as Cliff in the work that he does at John Marshall, because you don't necessarily have to pay a lot of money to get good lawyers. It can sometimes get you really great lawyers, and the cost is really great. Sometimes it's zero. So keep that in mind when I hear you talking about doing your bylaws. Have a lawyer look at them, make sure they're done right. But it sounds like Cliff has that under control, I would hope. So, I'm not sure what that means. Am I done? My time's up?
That's it.
So I'm a preacher's kid. My dad's a retired Methodist minister, so it feels just right to be in a church basement talking about trying to do good, right? I'm supposed to set the table first with sort of a vocabulary for tonight, or a very quick 101 about what community land trusts are. I think there are people like Jim Wheaton here who can speak about it for hours if he wanted to. I don't think we want him doing that. But there are probably several of you here tonight who know nothing about it. So I'm going to give a real quick background, and then Naomi and I are going to jump into the program. I'm actually going to read some kind of boring bullet points, but as I call them out, if you have questions, let me know. And then this is only setting the table for the rest of the conversation tonight. So community land trusts are organized almost always as nonprofit corporations that are governed by a board of community leaders, local business, and land trust homeowners. The first model appeared in the early 1970s as a strategy to keep houses permanently affordable and to mitigate gentrification and displacement, issues we hear a lot about these days in Woodlawn and other communities in Chicago. Among the best known of community land trusts is in Burlington, Vermont, and it has over 500 parcels, which includes residential and commercial buildings. According to a Grounded Solutions Network, there's about 280 community land trusts in the United States. Now, a community land trust board ensures that the land will not be sold to developers by keeping it in the community's possession, essentially, but still allows people to buy a home and earn equity in the structure. A community land trust home will always be affordable. Generally, a 99-year lease between the homeowner and the nonprofit governs the use of the land. Land trust bylaws set a fixed rate for the house's appreciation. It can be any number of percent per year, but people agree on that from the outset, so that the homeowner can build equity while still keeping the price affordable for the next buyer. The homeowner agrees to sell the home at a resale restricted and affordable price to another lower income home buyer in the future. Consequently, the homeowner is able to successfully own a home and build wealth from an investment, while the organization is able to preserve the public's investment in the affordable home permanently to help family after family after family. So that's just kind of the ground rules for tonight. That's very basic overview. We're going to get into a lot of details of it and explain to you how this can work and does work in Chicago. I think I was going to kick this off. Is that right? Yeah. Yeah. Excellent. So we're going to start with a little bit of background about what we're doing with the Chicago Community Loan Fund and some other partners. Just as real quick background, the Chicago Community Loan Fund has been around for 27 years. It's a nonprofit organization. It's a CDFI, a Community Development Financial Institution. That means primarily we are a lender. We lend in primarily low-income neighborhoods. CCLF covers the 6-county region. I have loans in every one of those 6 counties, but honestly, about 85% of my portfolio is in Chicago, and most of that's in the south and west sides. So when we are primarily doing development in low-income neighborhoods, from time to time we'll do a development that is for the benefit of low-income people. For instance, I have a loan out right now at the corner of, there's a Clark and Division. So for those of you who know Chicago pretty well, you're like, that's the Gold Coast. But there's an SRO there. And people don't even know there's an SRO. It's called Mark Twain, and we have a loan out on. That's a single room occupancy, an SRO. It's for people of very low incomes who usually stay in buildings that maybe they share community wash facilities and stuff like that, and have very small rooms, but allows people of very low incomes to live in this case, the Gold Coast. And again, I don't think most people in the Gold Coast know that that SRO is even there. So that's quick and dirty. That's what the Chicago Community Loan Fund's about. We primarily do development. We're not really a small business lender. We lend to developers mostly. But we also lend on social enterprises, and we also lend on co-ops. We were founded 27 years ago to do social enterprises and to do co-ops, so it's part of our DNA. We still do it to this day. Traditional banks, traditional lenders are kind of wary of those things to this day, so we still do it. So I'm going to give you a quick slideshow here to tell you about what we have created with some partners, and it's called the Chicago Land Owners Land Trust. Arrow down, is that right, Allegra? I think so.
It should be
to the right, down, right?
right.
Oh, thank you. Ah, there we go. Perfect. Yes. So when we had the Great Recession years back and the foreclosure crisis that came out of that, CCLF partnered with the City of Chicago and Mercy Portfolio Services to run the Neighborhood Stabilization Program, NSP, for those of you who are familiar with it at the time. That was a program that worked with 1 to 4 unit developers throughout Chicago to try to bring vacant and abandoned buildings back up on the tax rolls and sold to affordable home buyers. So when CCLF was involved in that program, we developed what I would say kind of a chassis working with small developers. As NSP wound down, we still had the ability to lend and work with small developers, so we continue to do that. We launched what we call our NILP program, the Neighborhood Investor Lending Program, and that is to reposition foreclosed single-family homes and try and get those back up on the tax rolls and into the hands of borrowers. So we then, in 2014, received a grant award from Bank of America to try to create an effort to preserve affordability in neighborhoods, and what we came up with ultimately was the Chicago Land Owners Land Trust. So CCLF, working as a quarterback, working with a bunch of other organizations, is trying to create 2 to 3 single-family community land trusts in Cook County. Ultimately, we think we'll probably do a couple in Chicago and maybe one in the suburbs and probably suburban Cook County. But some of this is to be determined, and we'll talk more about that as we go on. So this is a general overview of how we initially thought this would work in terms of after coming out of the foreclosure crisis, where a lot of banks own REOs, the bank-owned properties, and so the idea is to try to get those into the homes of new home buyers. And at this point, there's also just a lot of vacant and abandoned buildings still in the south and west sides of Chicago. So what we're trying to do is take those properties, get them rehabbed, and get them into a structure where they're long-term affordable. Yeah, please, thank you. So again, we're trying to rehab foreclosed and vacant homes, preserve long-term affordability, provide home ownership benefits, all the things I just talked about. You're still going to get equity in a home and everything else like that. Our program specifically with some of the partners we're working with, we're trying to get job creation for MBE contractors and businesses, and then develop some fees for some of the local partners we're working with. And I'll get to a couple of the local partners we're working with in just a second. So this is, again, the overall picture. The goal is, out of this program, the Bank of America funded program, we're hoping to get about 50 foreclosed, maybe 60 blighted buildings back up, working into the home, into the hands of families and affordable homeowners. Each area we're designating is a smaller area because we like concentration within those areas, so that it's like Jim Wheaton, who heads up the Chicago, Chicago Community Land Trust. That's Chicago-wide. We're designating certain communities and areas specifically, and I'll get to that in a minute as well.
Can I interrupt for 1 second?
Please? Yeah.
We'll send these slides out to everybody.
Oh, good.
After the event, just so you know.
Great.
And including what he read at the beginning?
Yeah, I can get you that. Absolutely. Yeah, I'll send you that.
This is a teaching time. We want you to get what you came for.
Yeah, no, anything you guys want, yeah. The general time of this program is 3 years, but it could very well go 4 years or hopefully beyond if it's successful and we keep getting properties into the structure. And so really the goal is to stabilize close proximity blocks in an area that have already vacant and abandoned buildings or buildings that are maybe in severe disrepair. So these are our partners we're working with, and some of you may very well know some of these organizations. Action Now, the Chicago Anti-Eviction Coalition, and the Greater Southwest Development Corporation, as well as Blacks in Green. I should note, full disclosure, Naomi's on our board of directors for the land trust. So we have already created the legal entity, and it has already received its 501c3 status. So that's all been done, and I will say we hired legal counsel through the Chicago Law Project, who gave us really great legal counsel on that. Cost me nothing. And we chose our first community. Our first community was chosen, was Chicago Lawn, but not all of Chicago Lawn. Again, we're trying to keep this in a fairly narrow structure. So designated really by the boundaries of 59th, Western 63rd, and California. Now we have expanded those a little bit, right? A couple blocks outside, just to get a little bit more of homes that were available that we thought would fit well within the land trust. So that's our first geography. I think the next slide will show, yeah, there's the general geography. You see Chicago Lawn, and we're just kind of that little box up there. And we chose it for a lot of reasons. There was the foreclosure rate, the fact that there were a fairly high vacancy rate, the fact that it is, though, I think, a neighborhood on the upswing. And I think that's something we're going to talk a lot about today, especially with Woodlawn. I mean, I'm sure everyone here has seen the statistics about Woodlawn recently, and I know one organization said that I think it was the last 6 months of last year, Woodlawn was the highest appreciating neighborhood in the country over that 6 month period. Third highest in the country. I mean, that's amazing, but that also comes with a lot of problems, right? Potential problems. Excellent. So again, if I can't emphasize this enough, the whole idea of this is to preserve long-term affordability. And there's the land lease that's part of the legal structure to keep that active for the term of the organization, and then certain resale restriction covenants within that, all of which is kind of in the foundational documents of a land trust. I guess that's just kind of summarizing, isn't it? Well, yeah, sure. Thanks. again, the goal is, and we're reaching out with a lot of minority contractors. We'll hop to the next slide because that. Okay, I already talked about all this. Kind of redundant. And here's the sense of what's going on with this. So CCLF received $750,000 as a loan loss reserve. We will be lending out money to small mom and pop developers to develop the homes. And as that, we need a certain amount of loan loss because those are kind of risky loans for us to make. So that loan loss reserve was given to us to help support those loans. So we hope to create basically a $3 million pool to get all the funding of these projects. If you think about it, it takes a lot of money to get one of these things rehab. And when you multiply it by 50, it can be a lot of money at any one time. Some of the money is helping to fund our partners I mentioned already, like anti-eviction and Action Now and those. And we're hoping to ultimately get some kind of pool of money to help with down payment assistance and pre-development costs. That's still kind of a work in progress. So this breaks out some of the roles, and I know that's really hard to see. It's like an eye exam. But we're acting as the quarterback, the Chicago Community Loan Fund. Action Now and the anti-eviction campaign are working on really generating a lot of potential interest from potential home buyers within the structure. They've been going out.
And Greater Southwest.
And Greater Southwest, yeah, and we'll talk about Greater Southwest too. They're doing a lot of community events. They've done it over about the past year as we got this thing up and rolling. So there's already a great deal of interest that's been built around this. Greater Southwest in the bottom left-hand corner there, for those of you who know Guion Foreman, he heads up Greater Southwest.
Lives in Washington. Well, he actually lives in Kenwood, Oakland, I think, but he as an investor, a major investor in Washington Park as well.
Yeah, that's true. He does have a lot of properties, and so he's a developer, right? And Greater Southwest does development. They do really good work, and so they, in essence, if you think of who's doing what role here, they're kind of the general contractor. They're the ones who are going to go out, obtain the properties, talk to the board about the properties, purchase them, develop them, and put them into the land trust. And then, again, we're working with the Community Law Project, University of Chicago Housing Initiatives on a bunch of the legal services. Some of that's already been done for us. And we hope long-term with some of the buyers, they can also provide some of the services related to that. Other potential resources for those of you who know about the Cook County Land Bank, that's headed up by Rob Rose. A lot of you probably know Rob. He does really great work and has a whole portfolio of properties and PIN numbers that he owns at the land bank. And there's always confusion between the land bank and what we're doing, which is a land trust. Two totally different concepts, but they work well together. Working certainly with Chicago Community Land Trust and Jim Wheaton, who's here today. The Chicago Micro Market Recovery Program, which Jack Swenson knows the ins and outs of incredibly well. And a bunch of other organizations that we think can feed into this. And we have a lot of local experts. We're lucky to have local experts like Charlie Doss and Bill Howard who have worked on these things in the past and know a lot about it. And then working with, obviously, there's a component to all of this, which is you need lenders. You still need lenders. Keep in mind, again, we're lending to the developers. Somebody needs to lend to the borrowers in these. So developing that pool of lenders as well is important.
Hey, Bob, will you quickly explain the difference between a land bank and a land trust?
Sure. So a land bank, the question was if I could explain the difference between a land bank and a land trust. A land bank literally, banks properties. They take them and hold them for a while to then find optimal times where they can then get those into the hands of people who can develop them. In the case of Rob's organization, it's all throughout Cook County, although some of the southern suburbs there's another land bank down south as well. The land trust is the concept we're talking about here tonight. It's about having a lease that runs with the property and the improvement, the actual building on top of that lease to preserve long-term affordability.
I have a question.
Ma'am?
Could you explain, so how is it that just by virtue of being a land trust that it is somehow more affordable for me? And how do I find a property, or what am I buying? What am I not buying?
Right. So, really good questions. Thought you were going to cover some of this. I'm kidding. No. So what happens with the land trust is, as we develop and get properties, we're going to hold those and then start marketing it to the people who have already expressed interest in doing it. So, it's not a typical sale of a house where if you, probably a lot of homeowners here, I imagine. And if you're not, you've thought about home ownership, and you know when you buy that house, what else are you buying? You're buying the land, right? That's not exactly what you're doing with a land trust, because something has to run with the property to have restrictions on it to always keep that property at an affordable rate. Now, keep in mind, when the nonprofit has been established, just like our COLT, we call it, the Chicagoland Owners Land Trust, COLT, we've established kind of what those parameters would be and how much appreciation is allowed and what kind of sales restrictions can go with the properties. We just did that recently, actually. But it's the lease. So when a homeowner ends up buying a property, they also buy a lease. And it's like a 99-year lease that runs with that property. So it'll say if Naomi's buying that improvement, the improvement is the actual structure, they call it. If you're buying that improvement, you can't just then turn around and sell it to some wealthy guy for $2 million if you bought it for $200,000. The lease that runs with the property won't allow you to do that. So that's the hook. The lease that runs with the property, and that's a lease between the homeowner and the nonprofit or the land trust. It's a good question.
So who has other questions about the structure of it?
Or about COLT or anything else? Yes, ma'am. Is it Judy?
No, Pat.
Oh. Oh yeah, sorry.
I haven't heard you talk about multi-unit buildings, above 4 units.
So that's not our land trust. Our land trust is designated for 1 to 4s. You know, there are other kinds of structures too, that legal structures that you can work on in multifamily buildings. I got to be honest, I don't know about, and maybe Jim Wheaton or someone else knows and can speak more to multi-unit property land trust. A lot of the things we work with at the Chicago Community Loan Fund are housing co-ops, which can provide some of those same benefits, but that's a completely different legal structure.
And may I say that we're starting our educational journey together tonight, but there's going to be ongoing information that we want to make sure that we provide. Just don't want to overload you tonight, but land trusts can be, as Pat has said, multi-unit, up to X size. It can be an industrial property. It can be commercial. It can be a retail. It can be a vacant land that is cultivated in some ways. So it's anything that you can typically buy in legal terms in fee simple, meaning you own the whole Megillah. You can structure and own with a community governed land trust. So when I share a little bit later on, I'll talk about more of the sort of the storyline of some of the things you can do, an example of what you can do. But the sky's the limit, really.
So, for instance, in the Chicagoland Owners Land Trust, our land trust, we have agreed that we're going to allow for a little mixed use with like retail on the first floor of some of these buildings, and we have designated specifically, I think, we're really looking at just 1 and 2 unit buildings, but I think we would allow 3 and 4, but that's about probably it.
I had a question. You had mentioned that someone couldn't purchase a property and then sell it for $2 million. Could you kind of elaborate? I'm a broker, real estate broker. So there's, in my mind, there's for a community, you don't want the values to skyrocket, of course, because it'll displace people. But there is a wealth building piece. Right. So how are you managing that, and who's determining what that is?
So
did everyone hear the question?
Yeah, I'll repeat it. So she was wondering, why can't I sell that building for $2 million? We understand why we don't want that happening, but there's a value to people building wealth with their house. For most people, that's the single biggest opportunity to build wealth. So the short answer goes back to the lease. And that is, again, determined by the land trust early on. And the land trust determines how much appreciation can be achieved. And the land trust determines how much it can be, or who it can be resold to in terms of an income restriction.
Like what could be an average?
So I guess who is determining that? That's part of my question.
That's right, the land trust. So when I say land trust, it's a legal entity, so the board of directors of that entity. And that's set forward in a lease up front, and the lease The terms of the lease apply to everyone within the land trust.
Okay.
Paula?
So do you have a typical average median income that you would be looking at
So
for the people that purchase?
Yeah, so again, it can be determined by the board and the legal entity, and it can be, you could set it at a very low income. It's always usually adjusted to AMI, the area median income of an organization. So you can set, or of an area. You can set it 80%, you can set it 100%, you can set it 120. Most people aren't going over 120 for any of this because it's really not typically affordable, as you know, at NHS. Yes?
Well, what struck me as odd was when you said 99 years, a 99-year lease. Although I'm going to live to be 147, so I can put fear in me. If I'm in that house and 10 years in, I'm trying to get out of the house, will the next buyer still have a 99-year lease?
Correct. They'll be required to sign the same lease again.
Okay, so it's a continuum.
Wait. They're gonna. You say the same lease again.
So it restarts. A new lease, the same term, the same terms that govern the land trust itself. Yeah.
So it won't. And so the 99, the clock on the 99 starts over again.
Yeah.
What?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. Oh.
Yes. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Yeah.
There's a question in the back there.
Lynette was.
Hi, can you, I guess I have two questions. Can you say more about the nonprofit organization that was formed? How was it formed? Does that structure look like any other 501c3? Can you just talk about how it's come together and the sustainability of that? And then my second question is about how property taxes are handled.
Great questions.
Yeah. So I'll take your first question first. So the board was put together by those partner organizations I highlighted originally. My organization, Action Now, Anti-Eviction Campaign, Greater Southwest. So we have representatives on the board from each of those entities. Okay. And then we sought people in communities that we thought we might be, like for instance, we have some people in Chicago Lawn, residents in Chicago on the board. And it's a board that has a little bit of flexibility. You can set up nonprofits with a little bit of growth one way or the other in terms of the size of a board of directors. So we didn't max out our board of directors originally because as we bring on a new community, we would want board members on for that purpose. And then with each community, we're also setting up kind of an advisory committee for that neighborhood or for that geography. Does that make sense? So that they can advise specifically to that neighborhood. Paul?
Well, I had a question. So if Greater Southwest and SWAP if you did say, let's say South Shore, or even if you did Woodline, they would be the same board of directors?
It'd be the same board of directors, but we would, the goal, and again, the board can determine this, but right now we only have the one legal structure, but we set up this legal structure so that it could have flexibility to do more than one neighborhood. It was set up originally with that intention, like for 3 or 4 of them.
Okay.
Ma'am?
As far as you know, for the land trust that's set up, would people be able to buy housing with ITINs or would they need social security numbers?
That question normally goes, and Paula will tell you this as well, that question would normally go to the lender.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the issue. Now, for instance, Neighborhood Lending Services, which is the financial lending arm of Neighborhood Housing Services, they do or have probably still lend on ITINs. But as you probably know, not all lenders do.
Yeah.
Or some lenders limit their size of their portfolio that they'll do that for. Good. It's a really good question.
There was one more question in the back. We have time for this one, and then I'd like to go ahead and let Naomi present, and then hopefully we'll have some more time at the end.
Can I ask you to go back to the property tax?
Right there.
Sorry, totally forgot.
Sorry.
Boy, I'm not even. Do you know?
The question was
about the property tax.
I was asking how property taxes would be handled under the land trust structure.
Well, the property taxes are handled the same way that they normally would be. The value of affordability really comes in that in the sale of the property to the occupant, that you are never paying the cost of the land. So in areas where the price of the land is appreciating, if you, for example, in some neighborhoods you might pay $30, $50, $100,000 for a lot, and then you build on it, and then that price is amortized into the cost of the building. In this case, you're not paying for that. You're paying for the improvement on the property, and of course you can leave it in a will. You can sell it. Typically, as Rob said, that you're going to have a cap on how much appreciation, no matter what's happening to the left of you and to the right of you, your property is going to remain affordable for the person who comes behind you. That's, otherwise what? Appreciation just runs rampant, right? And so there is, as this broker up here in the front questioned, there is a balance. We have in America commoditized our homes, and many of us of a certain age, our parents refied our, the family house for college and some other things, and so we're not saying that that's bad or undesirable, but what we are saying is, in America, so much of our sense of belonging, our sense of being of a place and being stabilized in place is just gone by the boards. And so one of the values or the virtues of the land trust is to foster places where people want to anchor intergenerationally and remain over time with a sense of belonging. Does that communicate? I mean, it is a trade-off.
Yeah, so for the person who wants to buy a house in Woodlawn now, thinking that this market is just going to jump in the next 5 years, and you're going to cash in after 5 years and make a big haul, land trust isn't for you. And the land trust is specifically designed to stop that.
And if you have just random numbers, 1,000 properties, you noticed in the map that that was demonstrated in Chicago Lawn. They have one small section of it. It's not designed to lock down an entire area, region, particular neighborhood, but to make sure that there is in a given place a section, and it's not necessarily segregated, but you're not trying to lock down the appreciation value of an entire neighborhood or an area. You're looking to make sure that that neighborhood or area is going to be affordable to your grandchildren of a middle or lower income family. Does that make sense to you all?
And that's a great point, because if you think about that area I showed designated in Chicago Lawn, if you think we're going to do about 50 homes with this particular land trust, that means we're doing about 15 or 16 in there, and that's, maybe that's one on a block, probably less than that.
So I think we have time. I wanted to make sure the gentleman in the back gets to ask his question now, and then I'd ask the rest of you to hold your questions till the end, and I'll get Naomi's PowerPoints.
And also to circulate the sign-in sheet so that we've got.
Especially if we send out additional information, if we have an email or something.
Yeah. So maybe Cullis, can you help with circulating the sign-in sheet to make sure we get everybody? And
Allegra promises not to spam you.
Yes, definitely. We've got a few more chairs set up, but I think Jody is on the scene to help with that.
Okay.
His name is Dixon.
The gentleman who just came in?
No, the one who's trying to ask the question.
Oh,
yes,
Dixon?
Please ask your question.
So you talked about what happens with the lease when it's sold, and you talked about also being able to leave it in the will. So could you explain the situation where someone's living in the home and the lease isn't all the way up, but they pass away, and what happens if they decide to leave it to their children or something like that? How does that work?
So the same terms would ultimately end up governing. Again, that lease is going to run with the property pretty much forever, right? So if somebody passes away, it's just like normally, even if you live in a home and it's willed to your kids, the kids still have to take some kind of legal ownership, which is a legal event that then would require the lease being signed again.
Okay.
That's a good question, though. And by the way, I don't know, and I think it was sort of implied in the question about the taxes, which is, I think the implied question there is like, well, how does an assessor know that I'm not suddenly in this, how do they know that my property is restricted? And I don't know. That might be an issue where you would have to challenge an assessment, because all the assessor does is go around and value the building itself in the neighborhood, in the community. So that would probably be where you'd have to then challenge your assessment, say, no, I really don't have what is now a $500,000 home, because I have a lease that runs with it that restricts the overall value, presumably.
Who pays the taxes on the land?
The land trust pays the taxes.
Okay, so if that land is very valuable, the land trust has to pay that.
They ain't gonna pass those on to the people.
There is a process that is real estate tax specific that I don't know anything more than what I've said about. So let's just make sure we get our new, presumably Fritz Kagi is going to win his election in November. Some of us worked very, very hard to make sure that the wealth extraction happening in our real estate taxes in South and West Side communities was that those broken and corrupted practices are ended. You can fund a whole universe of things with $200 million a year that taxes in our community have been overassessed for the last good bit. So, congratulations. Okay. Yeah. So, community land trusts has been a tool that Blacks and Green has been teaching over the years. We were born back in 2007. We moved into the neighborhood in 2010, and we are on a mission to celebrate what we call the City of Villages, building the sustainable square mile, and living the 8 principles of green village building. And you're going to get a little taste of that. So a village, that's that place where you can walk to work, walk to shop, walk to learn, and walk to play. And so what we look for at Blacks and Green in terms of the tools, practices, opportunities is like a higher way forward in the redevelopment of the Black community, a new way of life. Like I said, if we want to just live in a commoditized place with skyrocketing prices, and you don't know your neighbors, and you're in and you're out and you're speculating, you're flipping, that's an option that's available to you. But is that the way of life that we want in a community where we're raising our families? And the conservation lifestyle, at the end of the day, yes, we are an environmental organization, so we're always advancing that, which we consider to be the beautiful life. So what I am talking about in this part of the talk is really more about the spiritual side of things, the story side of things, the tactical side of things, like what a community land trust could look like right where we live. And so these are all sort of disparate themes, the age of the neighbor, investor, and developer. We are using this tool to forward, advance, and promote the ownership of land. We're looking at architectural preservation. Preservation is the highest form of conservation, and so demolition of properties. We want to see more of those properties preserved and rehabbed and preserved in affordability over time. Building community wealth is core to our mission. The idea that of place, of people, of belonging, the consciousness associated with that, with heritage, the ecological stewardship, the idea that we are land-based creatures, and we are sometimes not as connected as we want to be with the earth that we live on and that we're stewards of. Energy production. If you and by the way, if you have not gotten one of your 8 principles of green village building, Allegra, if you could help hand those out to make sure that people can understand where we're coming from when we talk about energy production. What does that have to do with with a land trust? Well, remember, you can use your land trust properties for all kinds of uses. And one of the things that you'll hear about a little bit about tonight is that Blacks and Green is bringing in a whole next generation of solar installations on our homes, and community solar is that kind of opportunity where your vacant land could be utilized for those purposes. Maybe that's part of your land trust. Family fun across generations. We have the opportunity in building these land trusts and building relationships that go with them, that we are knitting the kinds of places where people know people, and intergenerationally, you know, our college graduates, they get out of school and they don't want to come back home. They don't want to come back to the hood. What is it that's going to make a young college graduate want to come back to a place? That, again, sense of belonging. How are we increasing household income? Through our community land trust. How are we being a place where lifelong learning can happen? The mo better relationships, mo better food, mo better exercise. The idea that there's a better quality of life that you can build in to a place that is based on stabilizing people in place against displacement. Nothing trumps ownership of the land. We were taught, those of us of a certain generation, that self-help, self-love, and self-interest were, you know, just sort of the guiding principles of being. So we are wanting to make sure that people who are living in the area are building their skills, this economy of a place. And I'm going to give you a specific example of the economy that can be fostered by a land trust. How does that help build, increase, and foster community wealth, so that you're moving from stakeholder? We're all stakeholders, but are we shareholders? What are we owning? So stabilizing, belonging, bringing back our people who've taken an exodus, and really telling the stories. How are we knitting our stories into place, and how are we using the opportunity of tourism right now? One anchoring theme that I want you to percolate on is a land trust where a business is located. We talked about industrial, commercial, retail, residential. We are wanting you to imagine, in the place where you live, what kind of businesses, what kind of themes, what kinds of activities, commercial, residential, economic activities, are you wanting to put in your place? And so one idea for here is something embedded in the natural landscape. The economy associated with growing food, growing plants, growing just the growing economy. We are people who, many of us, and in this area of Woodlawn, where I'm based, is a great migration community. Do you know what I'm talking? Raise your hand if you know what I mean when I say great migration community. Okay, so for those who don't know, that 7 million African Americans voted with our feet, and we moved, what they say, up south for freedom and economic opportunity, and many landed right in West Woodlawn. Well, the picture that I have here is is Shirley Sherrod on a 2,000-acre cooperatively owned property down in Georgia. And I put that there because her cooperative land work became so successful in the recent past that we're looking for ways to tie our older past into our future, and that's what you'll see as part of the work at Blacks and Green. You'll have this explanation of some of the work that we do. Social enterprises were mentioned. We're looking at how to anchor social enterprises on land in community land trusts so that neighbors can walk to work, so that there is an economic hub where people live. This is just an example of the kinds of supplies, businesses, products that neighbors can engage in and own in a place where they are able to walk to work. This is our community of West Woodlawn, and what we have proposed is a relationship woven into the fabric of the neighborhood that puts a strong green infrastructure where people live. Again, many of us come from the South. We recognize that we come from people who make something and sell it. There's a rosemary olive oil product that we made from our garden as part of bringing the seeds of the South into fruition here in the age of climate crisis. So we left the South. It's the great Jacob Lawrence painting. We came by the millions. The land that we lost, some of it, much of it stolen, we find ourselves now here in the tight little island. Again, belonging, history, heritage, culture, ownership of the land. How can you work together with your neighbors to have conversations about what you want to see your place be? Again, the old to the new. Can you own, develop, and manage the property where you live? So these are in honor of the Great Migration Centennial of 2016. We proposed a community land trust based on the 16 Great Migration Gardens of West Woodlawn. 2016, 16 gardens. And the idea was to, you've heard a lot about placemaking. So how do you take land that is depreciated, underutilized, blighted, and how do you turn it into an asset in the place where you live? Can you take that land and other than, in addition to building on it, can you create a place with sculpture, that kind of art, food production, and that tells the story of people who lived in that place? It's very important. You'll notice that names of neighborhoods change, right? Are you with me? Names of neighborhoods change, but how are we anchoring and remembering the heritage of a place? This was one way of looking at how to take a community land trust approach and embed it into a placemaking strategy that had an economic impact. So the idea that you could identify properties in your neighborhood, this is the map, and put them into your trust was part of understanding that as the Obama Center was coming to this particular area, that there were opportunities to turn this asset of land into commerce. So it just so happens that the West Woodlawn Botanic Garden and Village Farm Initiative is on track to become America's first certified arboretum. And this is a tour that was designed to go from community land trust property to community land trust property as part of a way of welcoming the world into the neighborhood. Again, tourism in the place where your land trusts are anchored. If you look at the lifeblood, the economic lifeblood of a neighborhood, you're going to want to correlate how your neighbor-owned businesses, in this case, this was the neighborhood where I grew up, those dollar signs, those green dollar signs are all neighbor-owned businesses within walking distance of my house. How, with your community land trust, would you be looking at the strategic acquisition of properties so that you had a mix? You could acquire some properties that were on a commercial corridor, and in that way keep the opportunities in the economic sphere affordable to small business owners. The design of who makes the decisions about property, who decides whether something should be demolished or whether something should be rehabilitated, would be in the hands of the Land Trust Board. That's, again, one of the reasons why the advisors and the board members who are local to a neighborhood are very important. So in the sense of anchoring an enterprise, this is an example from the north side of Chicago of Gethsemane Gardens. That is a nursery, that is a garden supply, that is a gift shop. It is one of the most extraordinary examples in its class. And so we wonder if there isn't any reason why we can't replicate that model as a sort of the economic epicenter of what would drive the vitality of the community land trust. So, for example, if you have your neighbors trained as land stewards, and you have a worker-owned nursery, then you have a way to build wealth that is not hierarchical. You have a ready market in your neighborhood. Your land trust properties, we talked about who takes care of what and who does what. The land trust properties have an opportunity to employ people for four-season care. Shoveling, leaves, grass, flowers, planting and design, all tied in, again, to an economic epicenter. A food system economy can be embedded. Everybody's talking about urban agricultural now, but can you acquire vacant lots and put it into a land trust in your neighborhood? That here's an example out of Detroit. This is an actual neighborhood known as Eastern Market. But look at all of the kinds of businesses that are clustered right in that area. If you are designing your community land trust for sustained affordability, you're able to get a whole spectrum of neighbor-owned businesses clustered in ways that create an actual district. You want to ask people, where's your village? Where are you centered? When you walk out of your door, what can you walk to? So you want to be able to cultivate that sense of pride, that sense of belonging, that sense of an economy that's right there. And this is the West Woodlawn Sustainable Square Mile. These are different ways to look at it in the context. In Chicago, the city of Chicago created other agricultural districts. They are designed to be commercial destinations and also industrial destinations. How many of you know about the Gary Comer School on South Chicago Avenue with the farm across the street on South Chicago Avenue? Do you want to create a school as the center of your community land trust community? This broad green stripe across West Woodlawn shows the tree canopy initiative. Do you know that your children can graduate from high school and get a job as an arborist making $30,000 a year? What is it that we are what kind of economy are we creating as part of the land trust that we want to build where we live? So this is this is just a context for this particular place. But where do you live? What is the opportunity? What's the character of the place where you live? And what is the opportunity? What do the parcels in your neighborhood want to be? Do they want to be an SRO? Do they want to be single family? Do they want to be multi-units, 4 flats that people can acquire and generate an ongoing income for themselves? So you want to jump in with any questions? Deb.
I don't mean to go backward, but my mind got stuck on something. Since the land trust has a 99-year lease, So there is a rent that goes with that lease. How is that rent assessed? Because if a person buys property that's on a that's to build on a land trust, then they will have to pay for that, quote, improvement that's on the land, be it commercial property or be it a residential property, and they will also they'll pay the note on
That's built into the financing.
And they will pay a rent on that land.
Is
that my understanding? Is it right? If it's leased, and the land trust is paying the taxes on the land, then that money's coming from somewhere. So where is the money to pay the taxes or to profit the land trust, the community trust organization? Where is that money coming from? Is there a rent that is paid for that land?
There, and again, it's yes, because there has to be that notion of consideration within the law for the lease. It's generally set at a fairly nominal amount. I know we set ours. I'm trying to remember the amount we set in for a Colt. It wasn't much. Anyway.
I don't remember, but there's also the mortgage also. Right. So the cost of the transaction will include the mortgage, which will also have embedded in it price points associated with how the land trust is actually structured, so that the cash flows from your mortgage are also accommodating the cost of operating, the land. If you think about a condo, for example, you know that you've got an association fee, okay? It's analogous to that.
Allegra, if I may call a bit of an audible here, although I gave him a little bit of a heads up. We have Jim Wheaton with us tonight, and I did give him a heads up and said, maybe, Jim, you want to talk for a couple minutes about what he heads up, the Chicago Community Land Trust, and how it may be a little different, how it's similar, and some of the opportunities that Jim's entity has for people all throughout Chicago. Jim?
Sure. As I said earlier, the Chicago Community Land Trust was set up about 11 years ago. It's a not-for-profit corporation, has a board of directors. The members of that board, excuse me, are appointed by the mayor, but there's 17 members on the board. 2 of them are developers, 2 are representatives of financial institutions, and all the rest basically are involved in community development, either with community-based development corporations or counseling agencies or something like that. There's a handout that probably ran out. It says, we've got 89 units in the land trust. There's a typo in here. It says there's only 29. But our land trust is a little bit different than the one that Bob was describing. Of the 280 some land trusts in the country, the majority of them operate with the ground lease, where the ground is held by the land trust and is leased to the owner, and the owner buys the improvement. In Chicago, when we were established back in 2007, the decision was made to go with the second model, which is a deed restriction. In other words, there is no ground lease, but there is a restriction in a document that is signed by an owner or by a buyer, and that's recorded on the property, and it runs with the property. Originally, we had those deed restrictions for 99 years. What we found was that we were running into difficulties with some of the mortgage lenders who didn't necessarily want that deed restriction for 99 years. So right now, we have a 30-year deed restriction. That deed restriction has a couple of requirements. One, it says that the person who owns the home has to live in it as their principal residence, so we don't allow any rentals. Secondly, when they purchase the land trust property, they're buying it at a price well below what the market value is. But when they go to resell it, the restriction specifies how much of the appreciation in value they can get. So the deed restriction sets a maximum resale value. As it notes in here, of the 89 units we've had about 18 resales in the last 11 years. And on the average, people came away from their sale with about $24,000. So they got some share of appreciation, a fair and equitable share, but that unit got sold again at an affordable price to the next owner. So those two main things, living in the property as your principal residence and having the restriction on how much you can sell it for, are really key to how the Chicago Community Land Trust works. The idea being that, one, we have units in neighborhoods that are appreciating or have appreciated in value, so low and moderate income homeowners have had the opportunity to purchase a home in a neighborhood that they otherwise would not have been able to afford. But they're going to pay it forward when they sell that unit to somebody else who's going to take advantage of the fact that this is an affordable price and that they're going to have that advantage. So the wealth that's inherent in real estate, to a great extent, remains in the neighborhood. It's not like somebody sells that house for $2 million and takes that money and moves to Kenilworth. You know, somebody in the neighborhood is getting that home at an affordable price, and that wealth that's inherent in that real estate is remaining in the neighborhood. With regard to property taxes, over the years, going back to the days when Mr. Houlihan was the assessor, we've had well, for lack of a better term, a gentleman's agreement with the assessor's office. So when somebody purchases a land trust unit, we file paperwork with the assessor's office, an automatic appeal and an affidavit that says this is a affordable unit in the Chicago Community Land Trust, sold at an affordable price to a income eligible owner. And so the taxes are assessed based on that affordable price. Now, over the years, sometimes the assessor's office, because they're not necessarily all that mechanized, loses sight of a property here and there, and they raise the taxes. And then those owners come to us, and we go in and we appeal it, we get the taxes redone, and they get a certificate of error and get a refund. So we have kept the property taxes at that affordable price. So the handout mentions where we have units. They're in a lot of different neighborhoods around the city. We've got 29 units that are in some phase of development right now. We've been able to add homes to the land trust from the benefit of the city's affordable requirements ordinance that requires developers who are building new residential projects to include a certain number of affordable units in that development. And so we have been able to add units to our land trust because of that. Some of those developers have had the option of buying their way out of building the units. They pay a hefty price for doing that, but that money goes into the Low-Income Housing Trust Fund and has been used to develop affordable rental housing throughout the city. So that's, in a very small nutshell, that's the Chicago Community Land Trust. As I said, we started in 2007. In retrospect, it was probably the worst year ever to start a program that was based on real estate. So we've gotten along. The goal was originally, in the glory days where we thought this was going to really take off, that we would have 200 units in a couple of years. Well, you know, development stopped, etc. We're very interested in you know, what is going on with the Chicago Land Owners Land Trust, because I think our model can easily fit into that. And while we don't own property, the owners own the property. We have this deed restriction, and we have a mechanism for managing it, monitoring it, making sure that the resales are affordable, and that people are taking advantage or getting the advantage of having an affordable unit, you know, available to them, and you know, certifying that they're income eligible. Most of our units were. The limit was people at the median income, but a good number of our people are below median income. They're at 80% of the median, or even in some cases 60%. They've had the opportunity to purchase a home, and the ones who have sold have moved on to something different. Their families changed, their jobs changed, and they've moved on somewhere else. So they've had the opportunity to be homeowners, to experience living in the neighborhood, and then to get a fair and equitable return on their investment in shelter and in a home, and move on to something else, and to keep that wealth in that neighborhood and in that property.
Great, Jim. Thank you so much. That's perfect. And they're probably one of the better known land trusts in Illinois is a suburb that a while back had seen what they thought might be, had the foresight to see that there's some severe appreciation taking place in their suburb. So years back, they snatched up a bunch of properties, put them in a land trust, governed by a nonprofit, and that is the Highland Park Land Trust. And so as you can imagine, it provides a wealth of affordable units in a community that otherwise would be completely lacking in those units.
They own property in Evanston now.
Oh, do they really? Oh, great.
So
I know, I know
we're at 7:30. I don't know if we had any.
Well, I just wanted to see, with a show of hands, who is thinking about what benefits a land trust could bring to where they're living. Great. Well, we will. We're going to again move the information forward down the pipeline to you. We have case studies, other, we mentioned at the beginning that there are, over 200 of these land trusts. There's a different spectrum. Unfortunately, we couldn't get our movie started this morning, which showed, the implementation of that, of one of those models in North Carolina. But we will keep the information coming to you and follow up with, depending on what you want and need, the information, where you're trying to go, we'll have a follow-up session.
And
we can send the movie link.
Yeah, if you give your email, and again, Allegra and Jody will not spam you with tons of community law project emails, but we'll get you information and we can send you the link of this video that we hope to show weren't able to do so. And then get you some of the information we presented here tonight, which has all of our contact information too.
Great.
And Jim's handout has all of his information. I'm going to hang out for a while here.
Okay.
People have.
Great. Able to hang out.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks for the lively questions and discussion. Thank you so much to both of you.
And if you didn't sign in,